Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Engaging Virtual Delivery webinar today. My name is Caitlin, and I'm an Associate Marketing Manager at the Myers-Briggs Company. Today's webinar will run for approximately an hour, so please feel free to submit any questions at any time throughout the presentation. We are recording this webinar, and we'll be sending out an email with a link to the recording and slides within the next few days. Now, I'm happy to introduce our speaker, Dr. Rachel Cubas-Wilkinson. We're really excited to have Rachel present on this specific topic because she has been working with online learning and virtual training delivery for nearly 2 decades. So welcome, Rachel, and I will turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for attending. We hope to use this next hour of your time wisely. We're gonna make the session pretty interactive. We're gonna ask for your thoughts and feedback kind of along the way. So I would encourage you to just invest the next few moments in yourself, right? And in us sharing this information so that it can be as helpful to you as possible. And we will learn more about each other as kind of the session goes. So like Caitlin mentioned, I'm very excited to be sharing with you guys about online delivery and virtual training delivery. And I thought it would be really cool for you to kind of understand a little bit of where I'm coming from with it. So kind of my journey in online learning actually began way back in 2001. I graduated high school and I signed up to take my first fully online course, which at the time for the university that I was going to was pretty forward. They hadn't really developed a lot of online courses by that time yet. And I learned so much about learning through technology alongside a professor. And then as time went by in 2003, I actually helped a university begin to put programs online, begin to move instruction online in continuing education departments, employee development programs, connections to the community. In 2006, I actually became an adjunct professor teaching courses at the college level for online. I teach courses around leadership and organizational development and management. And if you kind of just fast forward all this time, there's so much that I've learned. And I want to kind of couch this for you to say it's easy to kind of see these numbers, but if you remember living back in the early 2000s, it was a very interesting time. So I want to give you a little bit of perspective. Consider that early 2000s, things like Twitter, things like Facebook, they hadn't even come on the scene yet. Back when I took that first online course, it was just beginning to come into the scene that we would do things like Google something, right? And the amazing iPhone, one of the first smartphones, wouldn't even come available until 2007. Instagram, Pinterest, these would not even hit the scene until 2010. And in fact, fast forward a little bit more, think of something like Zoom, video conferencing, that wouldn't even hit the scene for the public until 2013. Over a decade later after me taking my first online course. And today, Zoom is kind of like a household name, right? Based on what we've gone through. So it's very interesting what technology does with time, because there's been so much of a progression, and those technologies that I mentioned, social media technologies, others really do shape what we do in the online learning classroom and in a virtual training classroom. And they help us to have along the way positive experiences, not such good experiences about online learning, but all of it helps us sort of learn and grow. So I want to just share from that standpoint everything that I'm going to share today. There will be some statistics that will be from research. Most of it will be from my experience. And here's what we're going to cover. We're going to look at virtual training trends for just a few minutes. Then we're going to hop on over to look at what is the role of the organization in supporting virtual training delivery for employees, should you go in that direction. And then we're also going to look at evaluating your own facilitation competency and giving you an opportunity to do that. And then lastly, we're going to round out with some rapid fire tips around engaging virtual delivery. I'll start off here with saying there's going to be several times where I'm going to ask you to chat something. And in this particular platform that we're using, this GoToWebinar platform, there isn't going to be a chat box. There's actually going to be a questions box. So whenever I say chat, please just know to go on over to the questions area and deposit your question in there. And Caitlin and I and Jennifer, we're all going to kind of summarize things and read as we go along. With that, I'll also invite you to plug in any question that you do have along the way, because we're actually going to answer your questions post-webinar. We get those questions and we sit down and we put together answers for them and we share those back over with you. So just as a kind of reminder, and don't forget there's going to be a lot that I'm going to walk through in the slides, but I've done something very intentional in this deck, and that's I've included more text on the slides than I might normally, and it's because I wanted you to be able to take this resource later and go through it on your own as well, even without the backdrop of, you know, my voice in it. So let's go ahead and let's jump right in. And this is the first opportunity that I would love to have you engage during this virtual training trends. So I have a couple of true or false questions for you. And hint, hint, I have been known to maybe trick on a couple of these questions. So feel free to just kind of use the question box now to help chat in your answer for the first question. So pre-COVID-19 pandemic, virtual delivery for employee training and development was not used. Is that true or false? Please go ahead and let us know what your thoughts are on that. Okay, I am seeing a stream of answers, and I would say 99.9% of them are false, and you guys would be 100% correct. This is not the first start to virtual training and development. I saw, John, you just shared false but limited. Love that comment. We're going to zoom into that in just a little while. Next question. As some companies transitioned to remote working environments during quarantine conditions, they were well prepared to support virtual delivery. What do you think about that one? Is that true or false? Okay, I see, again, I'm seeing streams of a lot of false, but I did see somebody who said, you know, false maybe in some areas. So I love you guys that have actually started to add qualifiers to your answers. And those of you who did, the answer is absolutely still a question mark. We can't definitively say true or false. And the reason for that is because it was organization specific, right? There were actually organizations who entered this pandemic quarantine time, and they had already been doing virtual training delivery, right? They had already had employees working remotely. And so they did not have to make as big of an adjustment as others of us did. I do see a couple of questions of folks saying that they do not see the chat window. As a reminder, there is not a chat window. You use the questions function as chat. So for the purposes of this webinar, use that as interchangeable. And also, we're not using the official polling function until you see me say, we're going to do a poll. For right now, you're just typing in your response in the question box, and then I'm kind of seeing those come through. So thanks everybody for your questions. Last question, as physical working conditions can resume, we will all go back to face-to-face / classroom delivery. Is that true or is that false? Caitlin, what are you seeing on this one? I'm kind of seeing a mix here.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm seeing not necessarily, somewhat, maybe not everyone. So it's a lot more qualifiers than just true or false.
I liked this one. No one knows! Exclamation point. That was great. So a question then, since you guys are so astute on this, why do you think some organizations might not go back to mostly face-to-face or in classroom training? What are your thoughts on that? Okay, I love what's coming out. Cost, budget constraints, employee fears. You guys are literally doing the talking for me on this one. So that's 100% true. What I'm seeing with clients that I'm talking to is there's a continued focus on cost savings, which virtual training sometimes offers us. There's also employee fears about travel still and their safety and what precautions can be taken. Also, one thing that I think is really, really interesting that's going to, I think, change the landscape for virtual training delivery is I've talked with a lot of organizations recently who used to stretch their training dollars mostly for the higher levels of leadership at the organization. And ever since they moved virtual and they've been able to get some cost savings, they've actually been able to broaden the net of the folks at the institution in whom they're able to invest in with virtual training and development, which is absolutely awesome, right? More than just our leaders deserve employee development and deserve that investment. So if you can stretch those training dollars and cast a wider net of people at your organization to train, why wouldn't you, right? And then I think also you're going to start hearing more and more from employees who say, hey, I want those flexible virtual training options. I don't necessarily want to get on a plane and lose 2 or 3 days and go and meet there if I can just do it on Zoom. And maybe it has nothing to do with fear. Maybe it has nothing to do with budget constraints. And so one thing that I want to point out for you here, and yes, you're right, Brian, it's sometimes employees will simply prefer it. That's one of the truths. One of the things that I want to point out here is if you're doing engaging training delivery, starting off with questions like this, getting folks engaged very, very early on is great. It's even really good for the participants because they start to get a flavor of what the presentation will be about, helping them better sort of give a frame of reference. And it's also giving you an opportunity to be able to bring in your knowledge of the topic. The fact that you guys are practitioners, you know about training and you know about what's going on. So just as a quick note, so is virtual training the new normal then? I think we figured out that it wasn't. In fact, in 2018, 69.3% of training and development hours in the US were delivered with blended learning technologies, 69%. And then in 2019, get this, 9.7% of organizations, only 9.7, so think 1 in 10, used exclusively face-to-face instructor-led classroom training, which begs the question, what are the 9 out of 10, the other group, the majority group, doing? What else are they using? And so what we're finding in research is a lot of emerging and growing delivery methodologies that are being used. Things for on-demand training, on-the-ready training, instructor-led or supported training through virtual means. And what we're seeing is that mobile devices, social learning, virtual reality, augmented reality, all of these training methodologies are on the rise. And that's a very powerful trend in terms of moving training virtually and things that we need to kind of, keep an eye out for specifically. And I'll just give you kind of one example. So mobile training is an area of significant growth. And you might say to yourself, how on earth, or why is that? Learning on my phone? I don't want to be attached and tethered to my phone for hours for training. Well, here's a way that mobile training can actually work really, really well. So this is an example of an organization that we worked with. So I'd like you to meet Helen. Helen is a people manager. She's really, really good at what she does. And I'd like you to meet her new employee, Rich. And they're about to have their very first conversation where Helen is going to give Rich a new project. And she's actually wondering, though, how much detail, how much structure might Rich want me to provide him at this point? So she's self-aware to know that there are some employees that are going to answer that question very, very differently, right? Rich might have his very own answer for how much detail and structure and definition does he want when a new project comes along. So let's learn a little bit more about Helen. Helen is a very self-aware ESFJ. She attended a virtual workshop for leaders on understanding how to leverage her strengths, understanding what her blind spots are, but she has this desire right now in the moment, right before she goes into this one-on-one, to be able to situationally adapt. But oftentimes it's very challenging because you can't really go back and dig up your textbooks and all of your handouts and stuff from that training and all of your notes. So one of the things that organizations are discovering is that employees need active and actionable ways for them to be able to bring the learning from inside of the classroom into their daily lives. And so Helen does this actually with her phone. She plugged in her type, ESFJ. She plugged in Rich's type, INTJ. And right before the meeting, she was able to quickly look up differences in their personality style. And she recognized that INTJs tend to seek independence in their work, in the focus of their tasks, and how they get there. So it quickly helped her frame her one-on-one with Rich, and she offered up the project. She held back on some of the structure, the detail, and the how-to, and she simply said, if you need me, I'm here. Let me know when you need support. And that was very well received by Rich based on his personality style. So here's an example where mobile learning can simply follow up a virtual workshop for a leader. This, by the way, if you're not familiar with it, is the Myers-Briggs Company app. I would encourage you to look it up, speak to a sales rep about it. I'm personally super excited to use it in trainings that I deliver with clients because it's a way for somebody like Helen to take back what she learned in a virtual development workshop and immediately put it into action. Very, very very helpful. So I guess the question then becomes, okay, there is promise in virtual delivery, so how do we actually harness the power of it? How do we use it for individual and team development? And what I'd like to kind of shift gears to here is recognizing the fact that if you as an organization are moving towards virtual training delivery, it's not a small undertaking, and there's actually a significant amount of responsibility that the organization has to respond to in order to be able to do virtual training delivery. And what is that responsibility? So I'm going to actually walk you through a little bit of a virtual training playbook. So this is really, it's a very simple schematic. It's something that I just want to provide you guys that maybe even offers some chronology, some kind of areas for where organizations need to make sure and situate virtual training delivery for their organization. So first of all, organizations have to be able to provide the technology, the tools, and the training that employees will need to be successful to participate virtually in training. So you can't just tomorrow say, okay, employees, 50% of your training is going to happen virtually, without giving them the technology to do it and giving them the training to be online participants. There are varying degrees of comfort that your employees have with the use of technology, with the use of mobile learning, social learning, all these different things, and so that has to be accounted for. There's also a place, certainly, especially as the organization grows, to be able to appoint capable training leaders or external partners, bring in those external partners from all different vendors that you might need to be able to supplement your training. There's also the critical need to be able to know what your employees actually need. What are their emotional needs, their social needs, and their workplace needs? We tend to focus most on workplace, meaning what do they actually have to do to get the job done? But we tend to forget the emotional and the social, which is why things like well-being at work, interpersonal needs, diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of these things are becoming so important because we've had such a strong focus and emphasis on workplace needs to the detriment of others, right? You then have to identify what are the relevant need areas for employees. So you're not going to lose anybody's interest faster than if you are presenting them information that is not relevant to them, right? So it's super important that you do that as an organization. Then you can sort of let the other pieces fall into place, align your training and development dollars to those needs for your employee base, and then you go ahead and you deliver, you collect feedback, and you improve. So it's kind of a loop, right? And remember that you're going to get a copy of all of these slides, so don't worry about taking notes or taking pictures unless that simply helps you in your learning. And all of these things, all of these steps in the playbook have to be done by an organization while balancing their needs. How much money do we have? How often do we hire people? Do we depend mostly on project teams? How does that impact training needs? How do we connect training to business outcomes? And how do we create a culture of learning, right? So there's a lot here. Now we're going to start a poll. So you're going to see your screen change for a moment. And I want to encourage you to give me feedback on this section in terms of, are you tracking with me? So how would you say your organization is doing on these essential responsibilities? If this is the minimal amount of stuff that an organization has to do to be able to do virtual training, there should be a poll coming up for you now. And I'd like you to please go ahead and deposit your responses there. And then we're going to go ahead and show the results. And in a moment, Caitlin is going to finish closing that poll, and she's going to show us the results. Okay, Caitlin, what did we see on the results there?
So it looks like 68% said there was a little bit of room for improvement, which is the biggest group. Got a small percent saying they're doing great in all areas, which is nice, but definitely the bigger group is in the needs improvement.
Got it. So about 2/3 of you. Okay, so let's drill down on that one more. For those of you who recognize that there was at least an area of improvement that was needed, now go back to the question section and look at the little red numbers next to each of the steps. Which ones do you think your organization needs to focus on most right now? And if there's more than one, certainly put more than one, but you can put something like 1, 2, or you could put number 5, whatever that might be, but give us an idea. And we're starting to watch the chat. And it's really kind of all over, but I'm seeing a lot of step 3, a lot of step 5, 3 and 5, some all areas. Yeah, a lot of 3s and 5s. That's what I'm seeing there, quite a bit. And I'll give you some tips later on being able to kind of get a pulse for employee needs and some things that you can do there specifically. So again, these are all resources that you will have with you. Let them spark conversations at your organization. Take something like this and take a moment during some meetings to actually talk about it as an organization and figure out, do we have a plan in place? What are we going to do if we really are going to embrace virtual training delivery even more? Or maybe you've been doing it for 20 years already. How can you improve specifically? Okay, so let's now zoom in. We're going to zoom in one more layer specifically to you, and we're going to give you an opportunity to look at your own online facilitation competency. I would say that in the last 2 months, one of the most popular questions that I've been hearing from clients is, what do I need to do to be able to deliver virtually? I'm not sure that I'm ready for virtual training delivery. And I'm hearing that question so much. And I like that I'm hearing that question, because I'm not someone who believes that if you've been a rock star facilitator for 10 years, that you're going to be a rock star facilitator virtually. There's actually pretty different skill sets online that we have to be able to apply our own training hats to ourselves and recognize where we need to develop those skills so that we can be better facilitators in online learning and in all different sizes and formats of online learning. So here again, what I've done is I've disaggregated what I believe are the common skill sets for virtual training delivery, and I'm going to walk you through each one. As I do, please pay attention to asking yourself the question, which one applies to me? So the very first skill set might be the one that's easiest to come to mind for you, and that's the technical one. This would be the ability to be able to use the tools and the technology necessary for virtual delivery, online platforms, the LMS, presentation tools if you're going to be doing presentations and stuff. The second skill set is the creation of content. This would be for you to either be able to go out and find and assemble, some different artifacts and information of what people are actually going to focus on. So if I'm building a course on, let's say, diversity and inclusion, I would go out and I would collect that subject matter. Sometimes it might be bringing in a book, an author, whatever that might be, or writing the content yourself. So content creation is an explicit, area. And remember, this has to be super suited to the employee needs, or they're just going to disengage. The third one is design. So this is all about you taking that content, taking the technology that's at your disposal and marrying those two in such a way that it becomes an actual learning experience. It's tailored to the target audience. It's the right amount of timing. It's the right modality, whether it's self-paced, whether it's a live collaboration with 12 people, or whether it's a big webinar like something like this, where our desire is just to share information with you. And then there's the facilitation one. So again, this is an area where you might be a facilitator and you might have done this for 10 years and you might be a rock star facilitator in an on-site setting, but that's not the same as a virtual one. In a virtual training delivery, participants want somebody who can really engage a remote audience. They want somebody who can be able to speak to things in a succinct and clear way, pace themselves, create a lot of interactivity, read the room, so to speak, when there really isn't a room. And so that's really a unique skill set. And these have become so unique and so kind of defined for virtual training that oftentimes companies, and certainly higher education, has created dedicated roles for each of these. And if you're one of the lucky ones at an organization where you are one of these things and there are people to whom you can assign each of these roles, then you're lucky, right? So for some of you, this is a team. For others of you, you are the jack of all trades. You are the one who's wearing all 4 of these hats, and you have potentially a bigger learning curve ahead of you because of it. So let me hear your input again at this juncture. And what I'd like to ask you is, using that questions function, using the numbers against these 4 skill sets, which of these roles are you directly responsible for, or do you directly support? So we're trying to find out, are you a team of one? Are you a team of many? Which ones are you responsible for? Caitlin, what are you seeing there?
Definitely a lot of fours, but a lot of a team of one, all of them. So pretty good mix.
Okay, great. So what I'm hoping that that means is that one, that you recognize, for those of you who said, I do all four of these, that's a big job. I've been there before. I've been there where we have an organization that's maybe only, 2,000 employees and you're barely starting the training department. That's a big job. But for others of you, you might actually see how these things might work together. For some of you, this may help you formalize some of the way that you're using your current training department so that folks can have dedicated roles and be able to work together a little bit better. So this next section is going to give tips that are going to span all of these areas. So I'm hoping that it's going to be helpful to all of you, really. What I'd like you to also think about doing is, for the one that you said you were responsible for, whether it was all four or whether it was only number 4, on your own, if I were to be sitting right next to you, side by side at your desk with you or at your dining room table with you right now, and I said to you, tell me about your competency in this area that you own or you directly support. And I gave you the framework of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 with these definitions. Personally, I like to evaluate competency in both comfort and competency, because we have to feel comfortable with something and we have to actually be competent in it. Those two things go hand in hand. So how would you rate yourself? And again, this is just for you. This is not in the chat. This is not in the questions area. This is just for you to say, in the areas that I own or directly support, which one of these would I most want to look at or focus on, or where might I need some help? And what you're going to notice here is, again, this is an opportunity where I'm trying to engage you, but in this particular instance, I'm doing it in a solo fashion, because the type of information that I'm asking you to share might be a little bit more on the private side. And I want to create the value of a safe learning environment where you're able to share when I ask you to share, and you're not afraid of what that next question is going to be. So if it's kind of private, and it might kind of divulge something about you that you're not ready to, I ask you to do it kind of solo. So let's keep that value in mind. Inclusion is important, privacy is important, safe learning environment is important. Okay, let's now go to tips for engaging virtual delivery. So this is the section of the deck that I mentioned to you earlier, where I may have uploaded more text to the slides than I normally do. And I did that intentionally because I wanted to be able to send this deck to you afterwards and for it to stand alone, for you to be able to look at it and say, oh, that's what she was talking about there. Or even if we park it and we talk about something and we don't get to cover the last tip or two, that's totally okay, because you're going to have this PowerPoint with you. So just one more reminder as we jump in, please do continue to pose your questions to us in the questions section, because we would love to get those from you, and we will answer them either during the session or after the session as well. Okay, so let's keep going. Tips for engaging virtual delivery. This is the starting point for me on all of this, and maybe some of this comes from my adult education, background, adult development background, but the number one thing you have to start with, if you're a facilitator, is identifying and aligning the topic that you're going to present on with the audience. And what that means is the participant is central here. Talk to employees, talk to managers, learn about their work, learn about how they go about their work, and learn specifically to answer the question, where can training help? That's super, super important. A lot of you mentioned in the organizational playbook slide that connecting to the needs of employees was actually the area that you needed to improve on the most. So this is an area where it's just so important, because nobody wants to attend, let's say, an intro to typewriting course, right, in 2020. And even though that's a terrible example in the sense that it's obviously quite sarcastic, there are times where we fill our portfolios of training with courses that someone is not interested in. And so we have to make sure that we're showing them the ROI, that we're drawing the connection to how it connects to their workplace. Another really good tip here is, once you've done that, once you've kind of created the why, you need to also link it to business outcomes for the organization. So a big pitfall that I see when I talk to training practitioners or when I talk to line of business managers is that there is no real alignment between what's important to the business and where investment dollars are going for training. And in contrast to that, when there's a strong alignment between training and between the business outcomes that are important, then you can actually focus your learning programs on the issues and the topics and the success criteria that are critical for that organization. And it helps you justify the investment in training, right? Which is super, super important. So we want to be able to pay attention to that. Okay, let's go on to the second one. This second one kind of has its birth in instructional design, but I think it definitely predates that as well. And this one is, I want you to think about your design in a backward kind of way. And by that, I mean, when you're designing your facilitation, you want to think about the end. You want to say to yourself, what do I want people to be able to do differently after today, and design from that point? And sometimes that answer is new knowledge, sometimes it's new skills, abilities, or behaviors, and sometimes it's new perceptions, attitudes, or feelings. So if I were applying it to what I'm doing today, I might want you to leave with a little bit of knowledge around virtual delivery mechanisms, tactics, where we might see the future go. I might also want to inspire you to develop your skill sets in an area so that you feel more comfortable and more competent in virtual training delivery. And I may even want to influence your perceptions about virtual training delivery a little bit. So if you came to the session and you were skeptical about its efficacy, maybe I'm addressing some of that for you. So notice how all of those things are quite different from each other. A lot of this has its roots in Bloom's taxonomy and in all of the different, behavioral and cognitive frameworks. That's where that's coming from. And then another tip here is, whatever your desired outcome is for the facilitated session has to influence how you deliver that session, the actual learning delivery of it. So for example, once you answer for yourself, what do I want folks to be able to do differently? Is a self-paced online course good enough to get them there? Do we need to do a live virtual training? Does somebody have to join a live virtual training with other folks at the same time to be able to get there, to be able to get to that desired outcome? These are really, really good questions to just kind of ask yourself as you go along in your design. And another tip here to make it super, super practical is to use a basic framework. So for some of you, you may be doing this, all the time, but for others, something as simple as this may be new. So you might want to, before you design your session, sit down and say, here's what the desired learning outcome is. Here's how I want participants to learn it. And here's how I'm going to know when they actually have learned it. And so if we look at some example of this, I want to actually make this really actionable for you. So pretend that I am designing a course right now for leadership development. And what I hear from the business manager is, I want you to help my executive team increase their self-awareness as it relates to their leadership style and as it relates to their interpersonal areas, how they interact with others. That's great. That's my desired learning outcome, self-awareness. How they're going to learn it. It's actually starting to beef up a little bit here. I'm going to have them take the FIRE-OB assessment because that gives me really good insight around the way they interact with others and how they come across to others. I'm going to provide them a guided debrief and a verification of results. And then I'm going to give them opportunities to practice with examples of leadership style so that they really do feel like the results are their own and that they kind of self-estimate in that particular area. Then how I'm going to know that they've learned it, I'm going to hear the leader confirm understanding through feedback that they give me or to feedback that they give their peers during the live virtual workshop. So this is a pretty typical scenario, and as simple as this looks, I want to illustrate visually for just a second everything that doing something like this can do for us. So sometimes in a face-to-face setting, you might give me this amount of information and I'm ready to jump in because there's a lot of nimbleness that we can apply in a face-to-face setting in terms of reading the room, changing up strategies, changing up activities. In online and virtual delivery, there's actually a lot more forethought and planning that has to come into it. So doing these kinds of things can actually be super helpful. And look at some of what can happen when you do. For example, filling out this basic framework tells me who my audience is. It tells me that I'm going to need interactive activities where they apply knowledge of interpersonal need areas so that they understand what those are, and where they can apply leadership style examples so that they feel like they own their results. It's also giving me an idea of how I need to deliver the session in terms of it needs to be a live debrief where I guide them through a verification of their results. And then it also needs to be a live follow-up session. And why is that? It's because I want to hear them confirm their understanding either to me directly or in peer feedback through pair share, group work, etc. So it's giving me all of this information. There's more. It's also given me role relevant outcomes. These are leaders and they want to learn about their leadership style. It's also telling me that there's going to be pre-work in the session because they're going to have to take the fire OB ahead of time. I don't want to take up live valuable time to do that. It's also letting me know that I'm going to have to build in activities where the leader receives feedback when applying the knowledge. When they go to apply their understanding of inclusion, right, control, affection, they're going to need to hear back from each other, whether they're understanding the concepts and whether they're applying them well, whether they're drawing connections to real work problems. And then it's also giving me an understanding of how this relates to the business outcomes of what's important to this organization. For this particular organization where we did this design, they were interested in inclusive leadership skills. They wanted their leaders to be able to progress in the area of diversity, of equity, of inclusion. And so that actually shows us where that connection happens to the business outcomes and the priorities of the organization. So again, something as super simple as this framework, and look at everything that it can put before you to help inform your design. Okay, tip number 3, you wanna always negotiate the appropriate amount of time and the number of participants for your session. So this is perhaps the largest area of myth that I hear all the time. We're going online, we're going virtually. So that means we can allow hundreds of people, right? The answer of the maximum number of people is how many people does the platform support? It's boundless, right? Whatever the platform supports, that's the number of people we can have in the training. And the reality is that's not really the way online learning works. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to do a spotlight of a real life example where this really didn't work like folks thought it did. So you may be familiar with MOOCs. MOOCs are massively open online courses. They kind of hit the scene maybe a decade or so ago, and it was basically this. There was tremendous promise because technology was starting to come to the forefront that would allow us to do robust online learning or virtual employee training delivery. At the same time, we had subject matter experts who we knew to be held in very high regard for their expertise, and organizations thought, and colleges and universities thought, if you put those two together, if you bring in the Harvard professors, the MIT professors, rather than their knowledge only spreading to their students, we can use this technology and we can transform education worldwide. We can make it available to thousands upon thousands of people. So a lot of promise there. What was the actual outcome? The actual outcome is after millions upon millions of dollars of investment, many countless hours, 90% of the people who enrolled in a MOOC, in a massively online open course, didn't finish the course. Secondly, the majority of those 90% who didn't finish it never even tried again. They never even went back to take another online course. And so what does that actually tell us? It actually tells us that access to information, access to the world's most prestigious education was not really ever the problem. Because if access was the problem, then this would have been the solution. Right? So a lot of really smart folks started to get together to try to figure out what is going on here. Why did this not work? And what they ended up digging into was billions of data points. So at MIT, they looked at 5.6 million MOOC participants, even those who had paid for their courses, and they found out that 3% of them actually completed it. And they concluded that MOOCs had largely fallen short of their purpose and their promise to transform education worldwide. I find this personally fascinating, and I totally get that this is an exaggeration. Neither you nor I are likely going to be in a scenario where we're going to be asked to deliver training to tens of thousands of people, but the concept is still there. The concept is lack of access to information has never been the training problem. That's never been the issue for which training is called to be able to provide a response, right? So let's actually dig into What should be the drivers of your design? So this kind of harkens back to that second tip that we looked at, but the learning outcome, what you want people to do differently, new knowledge, new skills, new abilities, new perceptions, that needs to drive your design, not the fact that your platform allows 100 people, not the fact that you're going to put a ton of content online and expect people to just access it, right? So you want to set realistic expectations. And the next time, your CEO says something like, hey, can you deliver this training and can you do it for 500 people at a time? Don't answer that question until you go back and you think of what the learning outcome is. The next design driver is, what are the stakes of this learning experience? How high are the stakes? And how large is the gap between where people are today and where you want them to be? The larger that gap is, the larger the learning, the amount of change, the aha moments, the more you have to reduce your number of participants because your sophistication of interaction has to actually increase. So this is where things like live virtual training really do shine, because participants can actually dialogue with each other. They can get feedback on their understanding. They can test their understanding with each other. They can practice. They can hear the problems that their peers are having, and they can actually learn socially through their peers as well as through themselves. And this fundamentally requires fewer participants. So again, it doesn't matter if the platform can host 500 people. If the learning stakes are high, if the design is high, we can't have 500 people, right? We have to design it according to these design drivers. And then also, what is the audience bandwidth? So for example, if I'm called upon to deliver that inclusive leadership training that we looked at earlier, and I come back to our partner and I say, I'm going to need your leaders for 5 days, 8 hours a day. You can only imagine the response that I would get to that, because oftentimes where the conversation begins is, we are super, super busy, but we know we have to focus on inclusive leadership. You've got 2 hours. That's usually where the conversation starts, and we have to build from there. But you do have to actually think of ways that the flexibility of online learning can work in your favor. So how can you actually chunk learning? How can you spread it out? Maybe it's not an 8-hour all-day session. Maybe it's a 1-hour lunch and learn for 4 weeks in a row. Maybe it's some kind of chunked experience. Maybe there's days of break in between. We just delivered a certification program. It was a 2-day program. We did day 1, then we did a break so folks could go back to what their work was and kind of settle the work on all of their plates. And then they came back for the second day of certification. And it was really, really helpful to them to be able to balance their plates. And then also, you want to just make sure that anything that doesn't need to be in the live training time, if it can be done solo, if it could be done in 15 minutes, between meetings, something like that, you can actually take those things out of the training time so that you can better use the live time that you have with folks. So here's a little statistic for those of you who might be in a scenario where you're being constantly pressed at your organization to have very, very large trainings. According to the Intelligence Strategy by Design group, if you have learning outcomes where you need people to be able to talk with each other, get feedback, be able to test their knowledge, and the instructor can listen to it and kind of provide feedback and guide it, the average ratio is 1 facilitator for 15 participants. I'll say that again, 1 facilitator for 15 participants when the learning outcome is such that you want that live virtual training. Now, I will juxtapose that with saying, don't invite folks to a live virtual training and then never have them interact with each other, right? Then they could have just done a self-paced learning course. So you want to go ahead and balance that. And again, that was from the Intelligence Strategy by Design. So you can go back and you can kind of look up those resources if you're interested. Tip number 4, you want to plan for interactivity in your sessions. And there's 3 types of interactivity. There's the audience interacting with the information itself. So maybe interpersonal needs with the FIRO. There's interaction of the person with the instructor. So if I'm teaching the course, if you're teaching the course, that's interaction right there. And then also interaction with participants with each other. I just mentioned before, you don't want to do a live virtual training in a group unless you're leveraging that, unless you're creating interactivity. And I will give you kind of 2 tips on how to create interactivity here, on how to create engagement rather. One is create interactivity. and one is create collaboration. If you can infuse your live virtual sessions with interactivity and with times where folks can collaborate, then you're going to have a very engaging virtual training delivery. And there's so many ways for you to do that. I'm showing you some here, but you can start very early on in your session by asking poignant and relevant questions, just like I did today. I asked you questions about what are we seeing pre-COVID? What's different? Is this the new normal? And you had really, really astute answers that we were able to talk about. You can also begin with asking folks, why are you interested in this topic? Why are you here today? Why now? What do you want to get out of this session? That's another way to create interactivity from very, very early on. You might also use tools to kind of create a good social experience. So for example, if you're going to have a training that maybe spans several days, or maybe spans across several weeks and the participants don't know each other, have them ahead of time send in like a one-slide PowerPoint with their, with their picture, with their name, with an introduction of themselves, and give them that opportunity to be able to introduce themselves and create that social learning experience, that safe space, and be able to interact and collaborate from very, very early on. And then of course you want to balance these activities. There's no shortage of tools in a lot of these online learning platforms or virtual collaboration platforms. So it's a matter of using them in the best way that you possibly can. So let me pause here and let me hear from you again. And what I'd like to do is I'd like you to use your questions box again. And of what you've heard so far, especially maybe on this slide, which of these recommendations do you like the most? Maybe which of these have you not yet used and you really kind of want to venture out and use? And Caitlin, I'm going to ask you to tell me what you're seeing there.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of the breakouts as a good idea, as well as using polling and kind of combining the two. I think pair share is also coming up, but the biggest one is definitely breakouts.
Okay, I love that. And breakouts are super important, guys, in terms of managing the number of people that you have and also managing people getting feedback. You don't have to be the only person that audience members are getting feedback from. If you give clear directions and you send people into breakout groups, they can give each other feedback. And I think we do that so naturally and so organically in face-to-face settings. We say, turn to the person next to you and talk about why this resonates for you, or share an experience, or how might you apply it. And in online settings, if you don't give forethought to that and you don't pre-set up your breakout groups, you're probably going to not feel comfortable doing it in the moment, and then you might not use that feature. So it's just a matter of kind of thinking ahead of time. So thank you so much for giving me those that feedback. I want you to notice here that what I did there was, yes, I could have shown you this slide and just moved on, but I asked you to give me feedback on where your head was at in terms of which one of these you wanted to use. I could have also gone a step further and I could have said to you, please rank your top 3. I want you to pick 3 that you like, and I want you to also rank them. I could have asked you a totally different question like, give me 1 or 2 of your own recommendations of something you've seen work really well in virtual training, and maybe it's not even on here at all. Or I could have put you into breakout groups of no more than maybe 5 or 6 people. Otherwise, I think they get a little bit challenging. I could have put you in your own breakout groups of 5 or 6 to talk about these and to talk about how you would apply them in your virtual training delivery. So with the same piece of content, there's just so many ways to dig into the information, to get interactive, and to create social experiences. I hope that's what's coming across. Tip number 5, this should never go without saying, and that's please be judicious in your selection of platform tools. I mentioned this before, but there's going to be an overabundance of tools available to you, but just because a tool is there does not mean that you need to use it. You want to start with the learning, not with the tool. So if a poll is simply not appropriate, if what you want from folks is more than what a poll can give you, forgo the poll and use a combination of chat, and breakout groups. So you want to be very strategic. You want to picture yourself after the activity. So at the end of this poll, what information will I get? and what information will they have interacted with, they, the audience, and keep building on it. You might remember earlier, I showed you kind of the 6 core steps that an organization has to be involved in for engaging virtual delivery. And I first asked you to tell me, just generally speaking, how your organization was doing on those. And I did a poll, and that was intentional so that you could see where the others of you actually were. You could see that 2/3 of you said, we need help in at least some or many of the areas. And then I took it a step further and I said, put in the chat which areas you need most help on. So one piece of content does not just need one type of interactivity. You can actually keep drilling down on the information. And so what you want to always answer is, how is this advancing the learning? So we're not going to use little stars and little things on a whiteboard if it's not advancing the learning, right? That's a very fast way to lose your learners, to lose your audience. But if you are using them to encourage dialogue, to help them analyze information, like in that former slide where I gave you this ton of information, if I would have had you pick your top 3 and then rank them, that would have taken you to a new level of Bloom's taxonomy. Not only would you be acquiring information, you'd be analyzing it, because you'd be ranking it, you'd be judging it, you'd be applying it to yourself, and you'd be synthesizing how you're going to use it, right? So be very judicious, figure out ways to advance the learning, and look for ways that it actually helps people with their understanding. Tip number 6, and I believe this is our final 2, this is something you're going to want to do, quote unquote, ahead of time. So if you have a session coming up, let's say 2 weeks from now, I want you to sit down and think about your communication strategy to participants. Things like sending out an email or maybe even a short video to set the expectations of what the learning will be like. Are we going to join an online meeting? Is this a meeting or is it a virtual training? Is it a brainstorming session or what's it going to be like? And tell people, we're going to use webcams. We're going to be interactive. I'm going to expect your focus, attention, and we're going to leave distractions, and we're going to leave time for work built into breaks so that you can catch up on email and other things. You also want to encourage, knowing that not everybody will do it, but you'll want to encourage people testing out their technology, their hardware, their software, their camera, their audio, not throwing these things on people from the very beginning, right? And then you even want to think about things like setting. Is it appropriate for the session that you might be doing coming up soon? Is it okay if I join from my iPad poolside? Or do you actually need me to be on more of a robust traditional laptop desktop? Do you need me to be at my desk? Might I need to access other resources? Also, remember that example where we were going to do inclusive leadership and I was going to send out the FIRO ahead of time. Another way to lose your participants is not giving them enough time to do things like pre-work. And so you want to be able to send it with plenty of time. You want to be able to let them know, here's what's coming, here's what the deadlines are. If at all possible, and I think this is an awesome practice, is get a little bit of knowledge from your participants of what they already know about the subject. So have you participated in an inclusive leadership training before? How would you define inclusive leadership? Even super basic questions like that you could collect via email would give you as a facilitator knowledge of where they're coming into on this session. And again, you want to be able to very early on create a safe learning environment for folks. So you want to be able to tell folks, when we start the session, you're all going to have a chance to turn on your camera, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and just prepare people for that. So this whole thing of everything that you engage with your participants ahead of time, I call this kind of your communication strategy. And this really does need to be strategic, sequential, and well-timed in order to build that comfort from your participants ahead of time. Remember, you're getting these slides, so no need to write some of these down if you don't need to. And then, okay, so I lied, there is another tip after this. So tip number 7 is to encourage focus during the learning. And these are some of the ways that I have found that you can do that. You can kick off the session with a very, very quick intro to the platform, so that by the first time that, and we kind of did this in a backwards way today, I hearkened to you that you would use questions instead of chat, But if I would have shown you a screenshot of what the question box would have looked like, and I would have actually walked you through that, then there wouldn't have been as many of you saying, hey, I can't find the chat function, right? So we would have created comfort very, very early on in the session. And you want to do that soon so that technology doesn't get in the way. And then you also want to maintain attention on the learning. This is where if you create a collaborative environment, you invite people to keep their webcam on, you keep it super interactive, there will be fewer distractions that will pull that person away. In essence, you want to be the distraction that pulls people away, right? I hope that right now I'm garnering at least half of your interest and your participation, and that you're not running off and doing a bunch of other things, or that you're going to sit down and listen to this recorded webinar in earnest later. And in order to do that, you also want to pay attention to things like timing. It's pretty common knowledge that in an online space, our attention span needs to work in chunks of about 5 to 7 minutes. That means that every 5 to 7 minutes or so, you need to be engaging the audience in some kind of way. Chat, interaction, a question, solo work, breakout group, whatever it might be, but there's interaction there. Also, if you're going to have a really, really long session, you might want to think about dividing it, or you might want to think about an activity that you can give folks to bridge those two sessions. So if I had the honor of being able to come back with you next week, I would have actually come up with a bridge activity where I would have said, come up maybe with the top 3 challenges that you're facing in engaging virtual delivery. And I would have had you do that, and we would have come back. And that's a way to sort of bridge these. Also, this is kind of an interesting statistic that we borrow from the marketing field. And that's the fact that if you're thinking of hosting a webinar like this, there's kind of a magic hour and a magic set of days. That 10 to 11 a.m. time frame for folks tends to be the most well-attended time, and also Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Why do you think that might be? And I think that's because for many of us, Mondays are just hard, Fridays are just hard. So very, very interesting to pay attention to some of this information. And then lastly, what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to capture training feedback. Always, always, always capture feedback. In fact, I tell folks, it doesn't even matter if the feedback you get is positive or negative. It really doesn't. What matters is that you're getting it and that you're using that feedback for the very next time. You remember earlier that I said my personal definition of dexterity in virtual delivery is a dual concept of comfort and competency. I have not built my comfort and my competency in online learning without feedback. Right, over those last 2 decades. If I would just be delivering and not asking for feedback, I'd probably never get any better. I'd probably not change my tone and speak up and try to ask you provocative questions and look for ways for interactivity, because I would have never heard that feedback from folks. So the idea there is ask for feedback, ask for it promptly. Let's round it out with an additional consideration here, and that's the fact that I don't want you to forget what you are really good at already. So if you're facing moving virtually, moving online, but you're a really good facilitator and you've heard feedback from people, what is that feedback you've heard? Maybe they say to you, you ask really poignant questions, or you explain things in a way that I've never heard them said before. Or maybe you are really clear at providing directions, or maybe I love that your sessions are constantly moving and you have tactile exercises, or there's a lot of dialogue. Whatever those strengths are that you've heard from people about you and about your facilitators, bring that in to the virtual setting, because that's still going to be your style. That's still going to be kind of your secret sauce and your starting strengths. So the last slide that I want to walk you through is some possible next steps. I've presented you a plethora of content today. I presented you the organizational playbook, which is the minimum structure that an organization has to situate virtual training in to offer virtual training delivery for employees, and how when one of those is missing, everything can go wrong. And then we also zoomed into the layer of actually delivering virtual training, and whether you might be an army of one, a team of one across all of these skill areas, or maybe you own one or more of these. And I want to invite you to move on from this session in kind of 3 ways. First, figure out what are your personal and organizational goals and capabilities related to virtual training. Notice that I said goals and capabilities. Those two go together. Secondly, reach out to us. If you have a question, if there's something you would have wanted to learn more about, reach out to us and we can help you out. excuse me, we can actually help you diagnose, design, deliver, or even supplement your training programs, whether they're virtual or blended. And we can provide you with training content. We can provide you with professional services that support you, and we can provide you with proven assessments like the FIRO that I showcased today, like the MBTI app that I showcased today. With that, I want to thank you so much. And Caitlin, are you seeing anything you want to highlight before we let folks go?
No, unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but we did get quite a few questions submitted that we're going to review, and as you mentioned, we'll follow up with them. And we got a couple of other topics people want more information about, so we'll be sending all of that information out in the next few days. So thank you everybody for joining us, and stay safe, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. See you next time.